Hey guys, it's Luca with Learning MTG, and today I'm gonna start a new little fun series called the most broken decks I've ever played. So I'm just gonna think back to all the best decks I've ever played in Magic, decks that just had ridiculous win rates. Um, so this is back to pretty much when I first started playing competitive Magic. I played at Millennium, and we had Legacy tournaments. Actually, back then it wasn't called Legacy; it was called 1.5. Um, and the format was a lot different back then. I think Onslaught might have been one of the most recent sets that came out. So fetch lands obviously really changed things. Every deck could start fetching for dual lands. That was brand new. There was a lot of really broken cards that were that were illegal, like Mana Drain. And by the way, this is the deck that I'm going to talk about. It's like a BBS Landstill type deck. World Gorger Dragon was legal, so you could, and Bazaar Baghdad. So you could do something like first turn Bazaar Baghdad, discard your World Gorger Dragon, turn two Dark Ritual, animate that, win the game. Um, what else was legal? Mishra's Workshop was legal. I don't think it was that broken. I don't know if anyone was doing anything that broken, but it was definitely legal. I think there was one guy at Millennium who was playing Suchi and Juggernaut with this workshop, so very fair. Survival of the Fittest was legal. Skull Clamp was legal. Um, and then oh yeah, Food Chain and Goblin Recruiter were legal. So I also played that deck for a little bit. That deck was really good. Um, so yeah, I'll talk about this deck. This deck, I went on a really crazy hot streak with this deck. Um, so we had two tournaments at Millennium. There was the Alpha and the Beta. I don't remember whether I was playing Alpha or Beta. I think I was probably playing Alpha. Um, which is a small entry as opposed to Beta was the free tournament. And I think I went 5-0 either 4 or 5 weeks in a row with this deck. So just had a crazy win rate. I mean, people's decks were not super tuned like they are today. Back then, people didn't have as optimized decks just in general, just in any format you're playing. Um, and also Legacy was super new back then, so people were playing all sorts of different homebrews, like White Weenie, Mono Red, Stompy. There's a lot of Mono Black, Suicide Black decks with Hypnotic Spectre and stuff. Um, People were playing Illusions Donate, I think too. So just all sorts of wild stuff, or they were just porting over their standard or extended decks like Affinity. So okay, so basically I went on a really crazy hot streak with this deck, but let's talk about it. So it's basically, you've probably heard of Landstill decks. So the idea with the Landstill deck is you play Standstill as your main card draw spell, and you can take advantage of Standstill by playing manlands, hence the name Landstill. So you can basically, you can play this on turn two even if you have nothing going on, just because you can eventually play some manlands, and then your opponent is forced to either die to your manlands or play a spell and crack your Standstill, and then you draw three cards for the low price of 2 mana, which nowadays it's not that great. There's the card draw nowadays is crazy. I don't think this holds up really, but back then there weren't a lot of cards that drew you three. The game was very different. Let's also talk about Morphling. Morphling was my finisher in this deck, and nowadays I think Morphling is pretty much unplayable. Just mainly by the fact that creatures have gotten so much more powerful, but also because just yeah. Oh, so what I want to say is also because you can't stack damage. So Morphling was kind of sick because you could even win in combat against a 5/5 with a Morphling, because you could make it a 5/1, then damage goes on the stack, and then you can make it a 0/6, and so you'd kill their 5/5 and your Morphling would live. Um, so so basically, yeah, but realistically, the reason why Morphling sucks now is because 5 mana 3/3 is just, you're not getting enough. They make like 1 mana 3/3s now, and for 5 mana it's like a 10/10 in Legacy or something like that. Yeah, so how about I'll just go through the deck and talk about my card choices. So starting with the lands, so I had like, and I'm not 100% sure if this is exactly what I played, but it's pretty close to what I played. 3 Fairy Conclave and 4 Mistress Factory is my manlands, and only 3 Wastelands, so that's kind of questionable. If I was going to make the deck again, I probably would just play the full 4 Wasteland. It's such a powerful card. It works really well with Standstill. You can either take out your opponent's Wastelands, or you can take out a manland to make your Standstill more powerful. It does suck. Your deck really wants a lot of blue because you've got Mana Drain and Counterspell and Chain of Vapor Force Spike. You've got and even Morphling, you got a lot of blue requirements, but I think it's just a powerful card that probably should have been playing 4 Wastelands. 4 Flooded Strain and 4 Volcanic Island. I think probably the biggest weakness with this deck, looking back, that I made a mistake in my deck building is I didn't have enough red sources. So I've got 4 Fire Ice and I've got some sideboard cards, some Red Elemental Blast and Starstorms, and there's just not enough red sources. Like 8 red sources is super sketchy. I think if you're building a deck with these kinds of red requirements, you probably want at least like 11, 12 red sources. So there should have been more fetch lands, I'm sure, in the deck. So one of the bigger innovations that I had in this deck that even today I'm like, that's pretty good deck building, I think that was smart, is Chain of Vapor and Force Spike. Basically, I found myself, being, as a control deck, being totally fine, past turns 1 and 2. I can just counter whatever they play, or I can sweep everything up with a disc. And I can, win on a card advantage game. But I was having a lot of trouble kind of losing to 1-drops. Things like Goblin Lackey, things like Aether Vial, or maybe an early survival, if they're on the play, that kind of stuff. So I just realized like having a way to deal with their 1-drop, even if I'm like down card advantage, or even if I have to play kind of a weak, like Force Spike is really weak later in the game, I'm okay with that, because I found uses for these cards in late game anyways. My Force Spikes could be removed to Force Oil late in the game, and my Chain of Vapor, it synergized really well with Nevin Ryle's disc. Basically what you could do is, since Nevin Ryle's disc doesn't involve a sacrifice as part of the cost, you can activate disc and you can Chain of Vapor in response, and I did that a lot. So those are my 1-drops. Basically just making sure you don't fall behind on turn 1 and turn 2. And then Standstill is kind of like the draw engine of the deck. I think if I would rebuild this deck, I'd have more card draw in it. Maybe play like Accumulated Knowledge. I had thought about and it didn't work because I just lost too much tempo. But maybe play like a couple Factor Fiction or something. I think would have made this deck better. Just relying on 4 Standstill is kind of rough, I think. And I guess Disc is kind of like your card advantage. Disc was a lot better back then than it would be now, also because Planeswalkers didn't exist. So it really did clean everything up. Okay, and then I had 3 Mana Drains and 4 Counterspells, so obviously I would have rather had 4 Mana Drain, but I only owned 3 Mana Drains back then, because it was like too expensive or whatever. So that was kind of funny. And I even wrote like Drain on one of my Counterspells. But, I mean, this card is so unfair, are you kidding me? Back then I guess it was a little bit worse, because you could Mana Burn. But Mishra's Factory, if you had one in play, you could activate the 1 mana ability as many times as you wanted to avoid Mana Burn. Usually I'm going to like Mana Drain into like a Disc or a Morphling ideally. So Mana Drain is just such a sick card, and I miss playing with that card. That was so much fun. Fire Ice is it's really good. Even in Cube, like I draft this card so highly in Cube, being able to tap a land, if your opponent doesn't play a spell, the next turn, if you ice their land, they're probably not going to be able to play a spell again. So it's just a crazy, and like tap a permanent and you get to draw a card, that's quite powerful for 2 mana. And then Fire against many decks would be a 2-for-1. So, great card. Also pitches the Force of Will. At worst, kind of like cycles and does something when it cycles. Such a powerful card. Disc was really the heart of the deck, along with like Standstill, in terms of, you know, making sure you win on card advantage, because it would just clean everything up. If you could survive to the point where you get to crack your disc, you'd pretty much win the game. Morphling was also a sort of card advantage in the deck, because if your opponent had, like, let's say 3/3/3s in play, you could give your Morphling flying, attack, and then they can't attack you back because you could untap, you could block, you could stack damage, and then you could make your Morphling a 2/4. So you could basically hold down their attackers and be dealing damage to them all at the same time. Super, super powerful card, and it couldn't be killed, because it basically had Shroud. For every blue mana you pay, you can give it Shroud. So I really love this card. It's maybe one of my favorite cards to play. So much fun to play, and I miss playing with that card. It would be so unplayable nowadays. It's just funny. But back then, it was really like, it was one of the best creatures. I remember reading like Inquest magazine, and it was like top 10 creatures or whatever, and this was like #1 or something crazy. So I'll just go over the sideboard briefly. I got like Blue Elemental Blast, Red Elemental Blast, Star Storm, which should never be in the set. There's no way I can cast red in this deck. So, but this is, and I couldn't totally remember. I do remember having Chill in my sideboard because I remember it would really like frustrate people when I played against Mono Red. And yeah, so I don't remember exactly what was in my sideboard, but probably, you know, some Blue Elemental Blast, Red Elemental Blast, Chills, Disrupt. I guess I haven't talked about Force of Will. Force of Will is obviously an amazing card. Goes really well with Standstill, because you can like tap out to play your Standstill, and then you don't lose tempo basically. You don't give them a window to resolve something. You can still counter. So yeah, this is my deck, and I'll talk about some more other broken decks I've played, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.